This is the Planning Commission of Wheat Ridge, April 3rd, 2014. May I have the roll call of the members?
Ann Brinkman.
Present.
Alan Bucknam.
Present.
Steve Timms, absent. Scott Ohm.
Here.
Emery Dorsey. Here. Amanda Weaver.
Here.
Silka Pop. Here. Thank you.
Thank you. May we now have a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. May we have approval of the order of tonight's agenda?
I move to approve the order of the agenda.
Second.
Please vote on approval of tonight's agenda.
Motion approved, 6-0.
Thank you very much. May we have approval of the minutes of March 20th, 2014?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of March 20th, 2014.
Thank you. Please vote on approval of the March 20th, 2014 minutes.
Motion approved, 5-0, with Commissioner Weaver abstaining.
Perfect. Now is the time for the public forum. This is a time for any person to speak on any subject not appearing on the agenda. We don't appear to have anybody in the audience. For those watching on TV, I highly recommend these. Come on down. Okay, so we will close the public forum and we will move on to the public hearing. First case is case number ZOA-14-01, an ordinance amending Chapter 26 concerning the subdivision regulations and making certain related amendments to Chapters 2 and 5 in association herewith. Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren Mikulak with the Wheat Ridge Community Development Department, and I will be presenting tonight's case, COA 1401. I would like to enter into the record the case file, the draft ordinance, the contents of this digital presentation.
Acceptable.
And I would like to note that the public noticing requirements for this hearing have been met. I just have a couple slides tonight. This code amendment does relate to the subdivision regulations, so I wanted to start real briefly with Subdivision 101, which I think the commission has heard a couple of times, and also just a refresher on what the goals of this particular code amendment were. As the commission is aware, a subdivision doesn't change the entitlements for a piece of land. It's not changing what you're permitted to do, but it is an important document because it's preparing land for development. So I put this analogy up here. A subdivision is to land as a building permit is to a structure. The similarity there is that they're really technical documents that are getting a land or a structure prepared to move through the development process. A subdivision is creating a record of land. It's establishing property lines or easements. And we use subdivisions as a city in order to promote orderly development, positive things like shared access, and really logical lot layouts, so we don't end up with remnant parcels and unusual lot lines. Specifically, the goals of this project were to really clean up the subdivision regulations. They live in Article 4 in the Zoning and Development Code in Chapter 26, and they have not been updated for quite some time, and they're really oriented more towards a community that it's growing and has a lot of land to subdivide, and the environment of Wheat Ridge is just, it's not that. We have a lot of infill development, a lot of unplatted, irregular parcels that we're trying to clean up. So we wanted to make our subdivision regulations reflect that environment. So the primary goals of the code amendment were to simplify the review process, to confirm that our design standards were clear and organized and contemporary, to make sure that our requirements were consistent and fair. As I mentioned, it's a technical document, so we really tried to remove the gray areas from the code and subjectivity. And then, of course, as with any code amendment, to always strive to improve the clarity and organization within the zoning code as a whole. So just as a quick reminder, the Planning Commission reviewed a draft of the subdivision regulations at a study session on February 6th. and you provided really helpful input that we took back to our staff group. We took an amended draft to City Council to a study session on March 17th, and we got direction from them to continue moving forward with the ordinance that you reviewed for tonight's hearing. That ordinance is a culmination really of your input, of council's input, and of several city departments: community development, public works, parks and recreation, city attorney's office. It's been a teamwork effort for many months. So that said, I do want to do a quick overview of the three major amendments. These were summarized in the staff packet, and it was a long ordinance to review, so I don't want to belabor it, but just to explain a couple of things. The first sort of primary amendment was how we review subdivisions. Currently, we keep calling it subdivisions, but we really recognize several different types. So the code currently has 5 different types of subdivisions and 3 different types of review, and we tried to simplify that by matching with 3 types of subdivisions and 3 types of review. So I know when we looked at this in your study session, we had really boiled it down to just 2 types of review, and we sort of swung the pendulum back. So we now have administrative subdivisions, minor, which would go to Planning Commission, and major, which would go to Planning Commission and City Council. And the biggest change here is that we've expanded slightly the administrative review to include any subdivision that involves 3 lots or fewer. Right now, we're only reviewing lot line adjustments and consolidations of 2 lots, so it's a gradual increase. As I mentioned, staff's pretty comfortable reviewing these 3-lot subdivisions because they would be types that meet all of the zoning requirements and all of the subdivision regulations. So there's no variances or any waivers. When those get introduced, they would automatically kick to a public hearing. The next sort of major component of the amendment relates to parkland dedication, and we discussed this some in the study session. There hasn't been too much change. As the commission is aware, we require parkland dedication for any new residential development or subdivision, and that is based on the number of new residents. If there's not land to dedicate, then a fee is paid in lieu. And this section of our code has really been interpreted differently over the years, and so we wanted to make it more fair and more clear so that we could apply it more uniformly to each development application. So we didn't increase the requirement, but we changed how we calculate the land and fees so it can be applied more uniformly. The density multipliers that we'll use to project the number of new residents is a change in the metric that we had looked at in the study section. And the multipliers that appear in the ordinance were really based on the feedback that this commission provided in February. We'll be using the citywide average household size as sort of our base number, and then offer certain reductions in the parkland requirement to 4 different classes of development. So senior living, any development within an urban renewal area, any development within a half mile of a transit station, and any development in a mixed use project. And that not only is to just offer blanket relief, but it helps to lessen the penalty to more dense development. It also helps to incentivize potentially more dense development in areas that we want to see it. So you think of an urban renewal area that's going to be, along Wadsworth, or the transit, within a half mile of a transit would be an appropriate place for more dense development. And we're trying to encourage mixed use development, so we think that helps. The reduction would help. The last item that I want to talk about relates to public improvements, and this is one of the topics that we didn't look at in the study session in February, so I gave a bit more background on this in the meeting packet. But essentially, with all development projects in the city, platting or construction, staff looks at adjacent public right-of-way to confirm whether it meets current city standards, not only in width, but also amenities, curb, gutter, sidewalk, tree lawn, things like that. And there are certain instances when we currently require improvements. The problem has been that we have several different sections throughout the municipal code and in supporting documents that they've been updated incrementally, and they all mean to do the same thing, but they don't say the same thing. So it's created this quagmire of provisions and triggers that's been very difficult for staff and applicants to understand and to, for us to enforce uniformly. So we realized that because the subdivision regulations discusses public improvements in a good amount of detail, it was really an opportunity for us to step back and clean up this issue comprehensively. And so the goal was to clean up our various requirements as they relate particularly to streetscape improvements, so curb, gutter, sidewalk, amenity zone. We didn't want to relax the existing requirements necessarily because we have created several policy documents, comprehensive plan, bike ped master plan, that support improved infrastructure like sidewalks and bike lanes. But we also wanted to be fair and equitable and clear and not overburdening certain applicants and letting other people completely off the hook. So the triggers for requiring streetscape improvements will remain the same. It's any type of development that results in a new road, a new lot, new development, or an addition that increases the floor area by more than 60%. And if you meet one of those triggers, then we now classify, we have 3 categories that determine whether you would construct improvements or pay a fee in lieu. So that'd be a project with a new road, which you're going to build the new road to current city standards, a commercial or multifamily project where you will most likely build the required public improvements as we currently require. Those types of projects tend to be on arterial or collector roads where we want to see an improved streetscape anyways. There's not a lot of change to those 2. The biggest change is as it relates to single and 2-family projects. I think I gave an example in the staff report, but right now you could have the same project, a new single-family home on, say, 32nd Avenue, which is a bike ped route, or on a local street, and one project would be charged many thousands of dollars because 32nd doesn't have all of the improvements that our plans call for. Or on a local street, you could not have to pay anything because there's no curb, gutter, and sidewalk on that particular road. So in order to balance out especially that inequity, we've established sort of a flat requirement based on frontage length for single and 2-family homes when you hit those triggers. That is technically an impact fee, and so there was an impact fee study that accompanied the staff report that justified sort of how we would calculate those costs. Colorado state legislation, Colorado revised statutes dictate sort of what an impact fee or development fee is. People call them many different things. They come in different forms. So fundamentally, this is what this is. And so we explain sort of why we need it and what that amount would be. But I think ultimately this approach is much more clear for staff. It's consistent and it can be applied uniformly to a plat or development. And now it all lives in Article 4, and we'll refer to that consistently. So there's a couple other, minor revisions. We've tried to clean everything up. We've used more clear language. We've reorganized Article 4, and we've updated related references throughout the code. I know this is a really quick overview of a really long ordinance, but I'm going to stop there. Staff is recommending approval of this ordinance, and your recommendation will be forwarded to City Council at a public hearing that's already scheduled for Monday, April 28th. So that concludes my comments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
So I'll start on this side this time. Mr. Buckman.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I guess just one question that I'll throw out when we talk about the proposed density multipliers with that base person, that's on page 4 of the packet. With the persons per dwelling unit sort of residential base at 2.12 persons, you note that the number's based on the citywide average household size and that it won't be codified so that it can be updated annually based on census data. Is there some sort of formalization of that process that in other words, is the method for changing that measurement codified somewhere?
No, we typically, no, there's not. We would wait until census data was released. That's usually around the same time every year. Mm-hmm. But we would publish it on our website to say that we've announced it. It wouldn't be something that needs to necessarily be approved by City Council because it's It's not really up for approval or denial. It's the census data. But we did codify that we would update it annually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just, since that's your basis for these reductions, I was just concerned that there was some sort of formal mention somewhere as to how that number is being calculated, and if it's going to change, how and when it will change. That's all.
Sure. Yeah, we didn't codify the process by which, or the date on which we need to update the number. We would use, my intention would be that we'd use the most current and accurate census data. So it'd either be the actual number from a decennial count or the estimate from the American Community Survey, which comes out annually. And they have what they call 5-year estimates, so they're aggregating their data, trying to give it their best guess based on the past 5 years of the Wheat Ridge population. So I don't have anything codified as to how that happens, but there's a couple different things that we typically do at a staff level that we just need to make a note that it's time to update or check what that number is.
Okay.
Yeah. And what I imagine would happen is that when we get, we don't assess parkland on a lot of projects every year. So when we got a project and it was time to assess them, we'd probably go ahead and check, is there a new number that we should be using?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's all the questions I have for right now. Thanks.
Mr. Dorsey?
I have no questions.
Oh, Amanda, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Apologize.
I just had a question. I was concerned about complete waivers, because while I agree that higher density shouldn't be penalized, I'm also concerned that with higher density, we do need increased park space and things like that. And maybe I'm reading this. Are complete waivers an option, or is that part of the staff review process, or who gives those?
So
I understand the multiplier. I'm concerned about
Yeah.
the complete.
So any request for a waiver from anything in the subdivision regulations would have to go through the waiver process it's in section 409, and we establish some criteria where the onus falls on the applicant. So that would be a waiver from public improvements. It would be a waiver from, certain easement requirement. It would be a waiver from parkland dedication, and any waiver request, including parkland dedication, would automatically trigger the applicant to come to a public hearing for planning commission and city council to not only present their proposal, but to sort of justify their waiver request.
Does that happen a lot?
Well, in the past it has, because we haven't been very clear. When we tell somebody you have a parkland dedication, the first question is how much, and we say, we don't have this great formula. So, that just immediately opens the door for somebody to ask for relief. And so I suspect that with our new sort of more defensible fees and formulas, we might not see it, but there's certainly a chance for, particularly I think, a higher density development to request relief, because the land dedication amount for a development that includes more units is going to be disproportionately high compared to the land area of the development. So, it's appropriate to have an appeal option for pretty much anything in the zoning code. And so public or parkland dedication would be treated likewise.
So I'm just kind of running this through in my head. If I'm a developer and I can get a waiver, I'm going to probably try and get a waiver, right? I mean,
Sometimes.
And
Staff definitely advises, you
Right.
don't have a great justification for why you need a waiver. So we openly discourage that if we don't think it's something we can support. And now that we have criteria, which we haven't had at all in the past for a waiver request, I think that alone might discourage folks. And the incentive of, some projects, if you're not requesting a waiver, could be approved, either administratively or with one hearing. So it's going to happen, I'm sure.
so if it does come to planning commission and then city council, will you all go back to those guidelines and basically say, okay, this development, we suggested this, here's why? I'm just worried that then the flexibility comes to these two. Will we then know how to?
I think so.
How
I
to
mean,
set those
so
limits.
you'll have, so if somebody has a waiver request related to parkland or any other requirement, they'll have to demonstrate to you what their unique situation is.
Okay.
Or why, and we spell out, it's on page 12 of the ordinance, that financial difficulties don't count as sort of a unique situation.
Okay.
We're cognizant of the fact that every developer has a pro forma, and at the end of the day, the numbers have to work to make it
Right.
happen.
Right.
But I think that by creating some review criteria for a waiver, which we haven't had and have really struggled with, will give you some guidance to be able to make, a recommendation or a decision, hopefully.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Pop?
I have questions about the public improvements.
Sure.
Was that part of the study that I don't remember this discussion so much last time.
We didn't have this discussion at all last time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I just have a couple questions about the triggering of the public improvements. So understandably, I think it makes sense that if, for instance, like the Fireside community, if someone's building a wholesale community, that at that point, gutters, sidewalks,
Yep.
et cetera. But for instance, I think in the first session when I was here, someone subdivided just like probably 2/3 of an acre or so. And in that instance, would that trigger this public improvements?
So it likely in that instance, they paid a fee in lieu. And in fact, one of the applications that you reviewed is the reason that this sort of came to a head. The Stevens Acres subdivision was a 2-lot subdivision on the corner of 32nd and Jellison. And if it had been on Jellison and not on 32nd, we wouldn't have had the discussion at all because Jellison's a local road. It's not designated as a bicycle pedestrian route, but by virtue of it being on 32nd, the fees that they would have had to pay exceeded, I want to say they exceeded $8,000. And so our requirements up to now had been based strictly on where you're located in the city, which didn't make a lot of sense because we have documents that say every local street too should probably have, curb, gutter, and sidewalk. And so we've tried to make it, and we had somebody else come in that I want to say it was the Durso subdivision. There was a subdivision on Benton. It was 4 skinny lots that had one house that became 2 development lots, and they had no streetscape requirement whatsoever. So it just seemed pretty inequitable. And so we thought this was the best approach. We didn't talk about it in February because we hadn't sort of realized this was our opportunity to address this more comprehensively, but we've continued to have pre-application meetings with folks and realized just how crazy this sort of web of different requirements were.
So I'm just trying to think what makes sense to me. Like locally, I've got the Bel Air community behind me and like Garrison and that kind of stuff. Would they be required? I'm trying to clarify, I guess, what a public street is. So is that considered something where they would have to construct a curb and gutter or a fee in lieu? I mean,
For what type of project?
let's just say a subdivision, hypothetically.
So a subdivision, like you're creating a new subdivision on vacant land.
Yeah, something like that.
So in that case, you'd probably be constructing public improvements, either because you have a new road or because you have a new lot or because eventually you'll be putting a new building on. And that's the other issue that we had is we had different requirements for subdivision versus a building permit, but most subdivisions eventually result in a building permit, and so we tried to trying to explain to a developer, oh yeah, there's no issue now, but we should probably tell you that in 6 months when you come in to do a building permit, this is what you're going to be required to do. So making it more uniform from the get-go. The types of projects that this doesn't apply to and have never applied to are like small additions, residential or commercial, accessory structures. We're really targeting any exaction like this has to be proportionate to the project. So, in fact, up till now, our requirement has been an addition that increases the floor area by 50%. And when we met with council, we did bring this topic up, and they didn't want to disincentivize somebody, from doing a pop top.
Right.
So a pop top's probably going to expand your footprint significantly, or certain residential projects we've been seeing as the economy's been changing have sizable additions. So we don't want to disincentivize that, but we want to really recognize when you're doing, a big project or creating the privilege of new development on a new lot, there comes with that a certain responsibility, and hence sort of these cleaner requirements.
So I saw that, was it 60% now?
It's now 60%. yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I can think of a pop top that was nearby where I'm pretty sure they added 60%. So for instance, in that case, would the homeowner typically just pay a fee in lieu?
So for a single or two family, in most cases, we'll be giving the option. Some folks would say, there's no way I want to pay $2,000. Like, why can't I just reap the benefit of a sidewalk? And they may end up with a sidewalk that leads to nothing, but
Right.
they can do that on a local street. There'd be an instance, you know, if it was Wadsworth or 32nd or a bigger road where we have a bigger picture in mind, we'd probably ask them or require them to pay the fee instead. But the important distinction with the single and two family is that you'll never be paying for anything more than the equivalent of curb, gutter, and a 5-foot attached sidewalk. So even if you lived on Wadsworth, where we want to see a 10-foot trail and a 6-foot tree lawn and trees and benches and lights, you wouldn't, as a single or two family home, you wouldn't be paying for that.
Okay.
So, does that help?
Yeah, and sorry, I just have a lot of
That's
questions
okay.
about
It's
this.
a new topic, and it's something that we've really struggled with, so.
So if
Keep
you,
asking.
I mean, let's say I'm popping the top and so this comes up and I have, you know, cousin Joe who owns a concrete business. Could I go to him and basically get a cut rate deal and ta-da, there I have a sidewalk that kind of goes
Yes.
to nowhere?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you would have the option of installing it, and, you know, you may be able to install it for a cost that is less than what we estimate it to be, and so in that case, we would expect somebody to install it. It'd be to city standard and get a right-of-way permit
Okay.
like any other public project. But if you went around and couldn't find, because it's hard to find sometimes concrete at a good price for only 50 linear feet, then you may choose just to pay the fee in lieu. Those fees currently and would continue to go into sort of our general sidewalk fees. So when that amount gets large enough, we can do a more effective project in a longer span than just a single frontage.
And then I guess my last question is just why, and forgive my ignorance, but I guess I always think of public utilities as being something that's covered by taxes generally. Is there just not enough money in the budget to redo like all sidewalks and that kind of thing?
Is there not enough money? I'm sorry, what?
Not enough money in the budget generally from just general tax revenues to take care of something like this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally, you know, we have a bicycle and pedestrian master plan that calls for lots of bike lanes and lots of detached sidewalks and trails, and there's not money for that.
Okay.
So it occurs most commonly incrementally through development. You know, in particular on corner lots, we ask for improvements to be built because it's the start of something and you can build off of that. But there are, you know, the Pierce Street bike lanes is in the CIP this year, so that will hopefully move forward, but it won't be the entire length of Pierce likely. And that's just one of many corridors that we'd love to see improvements on, so.
And so, like, I live on 38, so if someone lives on a side street, are they paying the same that I would pay? Is this making it more uniform?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. So particularly in the case of single and two-family homes, everybody is sort of paying the same amount. No one's getting penalized for being on 38th or 32nd, and no one's getting, you know, essentially sort of completely off the hook for being on a local street.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
If I have I live off of 32nd and Estes. I look at Estes, 32nd place, we had gutters and curbs put in about 28 years ago, the whole cul-de-sac. And, but I look at Estes, we have some lots with sidewalks, curbs and gutters, some lots without anything, and some lots with just curbs and gutters, no sidewalk.
Right.
I'm gonna pop my top, let's say, on Estes, and I have curbs and gutters. Do I have to put in the sidewalk? I mean, where does some of these neighborhoods are so mixed up as far as they just have culverts, you know, and I look at Estes as a real problem because there are a lot of culverts, and then we get a lot of street degradation because the culvert goes out, the water gets under the macadam, and then all of a sudden we got problems. And so how are you gonna address something like that if I live on Estes, let's say, and I'm gonna pop a top and all I have is curb and gutter, the guy next to me has nothing, and the guy next to him has curb, gutter, and sidewalk, and they're all different setbacks. I mean, it's just, I don't have an
Yeah, I mean,
understanding.
I think unfortunately that is more often the case than not in the city of Wheat Ridge, and we, in the bike and pedestrian master plan, which was started in 2009, I want to say, and has had phases adopted incrementally since then. We recognize that as an issue, and without the funding to do sort of a comprehensive fix on each street or street at a time, this has been the framework through which we can try to get incremental improvements. So,
But
to
how
address
would you
part of-
address this one person that's,
So if, for example, if you had a project and there was curb and gutter but no sidewalk, they'd only be paying or installing the sidewalk. So we wouldn't penalize somebody, double ding them essentially, because they already have partial improvements.
okay,
Does that-
even though there isn't a lot of sidewalk on that street?
Correct.
Maybe there's only 2 lots and there's
Correct.
20 lots in,
Because we're trying to get away from a location-based fee. So we would look specifically at your frontage and say, you've already got curb, gutter, and sidewalk, we're not gonna charge you
right.
to build it in somebody else's house. But we're trying to get away from not only the road classification, but sort of, at one point, we were trying to assess, okay, what is the majority situation on this block, and what is a block, and how do we, does it make sense? And, the goal for the city is to have curb, gutter, and sidewalk at a minimum. And so that's what we'll be using as our, metric.
I have another quick question. What if, for instance, like you said, 2 of the 3 variants are there, but let's say because of the particular landscape, it would be very expensive to install gutters, for instance. So is there a standard fee for just the gutter portion of that charge, or is it just whatever a contractor quotes?
No, the city would establish the fee. So in the impact fee study, annually, we get rates for asphalt and curb and gutter and
Okay.
concrete. And so the fee would be based on the city's estimation, sort of what we get as a regular rate. And if an applicant wanted to install, then whatever they pay would be more or less potentially, but whatever they pay would be based on the fees that we've established.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Joe?
I have a couple questions relating to the subdivision review. The first one is, it says must meet all criteria under administrative and the minor. If the administrative doesn't meet all the criteria, does it move into the next category, say minor? Because when it's on the major, it says any plat that exceeds administrative or minor review, it sounds like it automatically goes into a major.
Sure. So essentially, if it doesn't meet all of the subdivision requirements, then it's including either a waiver or variance. And as soon as you're including a waiver or variance, you go all the way through to council.
Okay.
So it's in sort of the reverse thought is that it's incentivizing hopefully people to follow the rules that we've created, that we think we've created pretty well.
Is there any latitude with staff if you're looking at the administrative and it sounds like it meets all 3 criteria, but there might be some gray areas where you can make a decision and say, this really should be a minor or a major?
We didn't build that in, I think in part because we're trying to get rid of the gray areas. If there's something
Okay.
that we think they're not meeting, then we would tell them they need to, when you request a waiver or variance, you're responding very directly to those evaluation criteria. So we're hopeful that it will be very clear whether or not somebody's meeting our standards or not.
So if for instance, if I looked at this and this involves 3 lots or less, I have 3 lots. That's the first criteria, and I meet all the other 2 criteria in that administrative. But what I want to do is I want to consolidate all 3 lots into 1 lot. But I'm not going to do that all at once. It says up here that it's limited to only 2 lot considerations. So in theory, could I take a 3 lot, consolidate 2 lots into 1, and then come back and do another administrative review, and then take that 1 lot and 1 lot, and now I've done administrative review, and in theory, I've consolidated all 3 lots.
Well, what we're proposing under the administrative, because involving 3 lots or fewer, you could come through one time, I want to consolidate 3 lots to one, and that's administrative. Is there a typo somewhere? What page are you looking
well,
at?
what it says under subdivision review, it says administrative views limit only to 2 lot.
Currently,
consol-
under current, today,
Oh,
that's all
okay.
we can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. And that's exactly our issue,
Okay.
is that some people propose to skirt around it, and we typically say, we know what you're trying to do, right?
Okay.
So the proposed standard would be, if you're creating or starting with, whether you're starting or ending with 3 lots or fewer, you can be administrative.
That's all the questions I have.
Well, I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm trying to be sneaky, but if let's say, I decide I want to buy out my neighbor's lot and combine it with mine, and so, sure enough, I just go through the staff process. 2 years later, or let's just say a year later, 6 months later, my other neighbor's lot comes up for sale, and lo and behold, I buy it and want to combine it. Are those 2 processes then administrative? Even okay. Is there? Do you see the potential that someone could still try and skirt around the rules?
Conceivably, but typically people don't want to spend the time or money to go through consecutive review processes. You're typically paying a surveyor more than you're ever paying the city, in the thousands of dollars. Review process is onerous, and so, one of the things that we're looking for when we're looking at a subdivision plot is whether it's creating lots that are compatible with whatever the proposed development is. And so that's something that you're not always seeing the site plan for a subdivision, but we're confirming that, what the person has in mind is matching what they're platting.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
yep,
Okay, so I have a couple things.
Sure.
I'm going to refer to pages.
okay.
Okay. First, if you could turn to page 9 in the packet. And this is something we talked about and I didn't see addressed at all. So for administrative, under B, administrative plat review procedure, is there any notification to the public?
There's not, no. So we talked about that. So when we discussed with Planning Commission at study session, we had at one point said, let's do 5 lots or fewer as administrative and everything else goes full-blown straight to council. So we deliberated on your input, and when we met with council, ultimately we realized that 3 levels of review is appropriate, that, not only from a sort of legal standpoint, but also a social policy standpoint, some of the comments and concerns that you guys raised, it doesn't make sense for staff to review some of those mid-sized subdivisions. But on the flip side, and something that, we had talked about in study session and we conferred with, council and the city attorney, it's really difficult to ask for comment and then ignore it, because we don't have the opportunity to say, an administrative subdivision plat is meeting all of the requirements. We don't have an opportunity to deny somebody because there's an objection from the neighborhood. And so instead of creating, an opportunity for someone to make comment, but then tell them that there's nothing we can do about it, then we've left it the way that it is.
So your assumption is that anything that the public brings up with regards to a 3 lot or less subdivision will have no impact. There's never an instance where it'll have an impact to your decision.
I guess you could word it that way. The similarity that I can offer is a building permit. So we don't offer public input to building permits. We're reviewing those against residential building codes and electric building codes. And in the same way, we're reviewing these against quantitative zoning standards and pretty clear, if not quantitative, subdivision standards. So we don't anticipate a public comment on something like that could have an effect on the approval.
Okay, I'll move past that one. If you could turn on to page 10, under item I, yep, not II. It states, minor subdivision, the planning commission shall make a decision, blah, blah, blah. the decision by planning commission is final for minor subdivisions. That's clear. However, if you go all the way back to, and I mark these, page 30, it conflicts on item K.
Oh, sure. So you have the final decision, but anything is appealable.
But no, because the first one, the decision by planning commission is final.
Sure. So you're, as opposed to you making a recommendation. Any land use application can be appealed.
Okay,
It's either being appealed, you know, if staff makes a decision in the instance of a subdivision, it's appealable to you, which would then be appealable to city council, which is then appealable to district court.
okay, so appeal is different than,
Then decide, yeah.
okay, I get it, okay. Keep going. Thank you for that explanation. On page 12, help me here. So on page 12, 26,409, we talk about variances, we talk about waivers, that's awesome. But then way in the back, on page 33, we eliminate the term waivers.
Waiver. So, that's a good point. So in section 115, variances, you guys hear variances, the commission hears variances when it's associated with another land use application, but typically, we think of a variance as a quantitative request, so you're asking for a 4-foot variance from a 10-foot setback. And this section, as it's currently written in code, and the part that you're reading is abbreviated, outlines the process for variances, administrative and non-administrative, and then it occasionally inserts the word waiver, which is not defined, and it's not, these criteria in this process in 115 don't relate to waivers.
Okay,
Waivers are, what we've now clarified is that a waiver relates strictly to a subdivision regulation requirement that may not be quantifiable. So I don't want to dedicate parkland, I don't want to give this easement, I don't want to, construct public improvements. It's more of a design standard request.
perfect. And if anybody's looking at this packet online or not in our
Sure.
beautiful audience here, I just wanted them to understand. Okay. And then, one more thing, with regard, on page 22,
Okay.
under 4AII,
Yes.
how often is the cash in lieu fee schedule revisited?
That's something that we are still working on. That fee schedule would be adopted by council by resolution.
Right, but how often is it revisited?
I think that's something that would be included in the first resolution for council, how often they would want to do that.
Okay, because the cost in 1990 versus 2000, and right now, our
Very different.
property values are
Right.
going through the roof, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
So my recommendation is a reasonably reviewed, like every 2 years, unless something seriously, or some period of time, I'd like to have it documented.
Okay.
And that is it for me. I have to say, I'm still not wowed about the lack of public input. And I realize the reason, but I hear the reason. I'm just not satisfied that there's never a reason that especially since it was very clear that the reason that you do subdivide, as you said, instead subdivision regulations prepare land for development. So that in turn makes the neighborhood aware that something's going to be happening.
Sure.
And without any type of signage, without anything, it can go unknown.
Sure.
So that's all. Okay. Any more comments? Yeah.
Just to expand on what Ann is talking about here, just to use an example down the street from me. A year or two ago, we heard a subdivision case on Ingalls Street at the end of a cul-de-sac. Actually, technically, I think it was on J Street.
Oh, yeah.
Private drive coming off of it. It was an assemblage of like a flag lot and some other weird things, and then a subdivision out of that. So when we talk about an administrative plat, I believe it was subdivided, I think, into 3 subdivisions.
That one, I think, involved several, because there had been properties that were illegally switched and swapped, and so
Yeah.
there were 3, I think, ultimate developable lots, but more lots included to clean up erroneous land transfers.
Yeah, it was like a consolidation and then a subdivision of that.
Yep.
For the sake of argument, let's say if we were to take that as sort of the basis for an example and say, we've got this big patch of land, the landowner wants to subdivide it into three lots so they can build on it. In that case, we're talking about if it conforms to all subdivision and zoning regulations, you're basically saying, well, it's zoned in this particular classification, which means it has to have this amount of square footage per lot for this amount of coverage, buildable coverage and all of that. As long as it meets all of those regulations, we can do it administratively.
Correct.
Okay.
Because the zoning is what's creating the development right.
Yeah, and I can see your point saying, there's no need for public hearing because it's meeting all that criteria. But when we're talking about a big chunk of land that is subdividable, even within the scope of, conforming to those regulations, I think I share Commissioner Brinkman's sort of reticence to not have some sort of notification just so that people are aware. I'm not sure if that's something we can resolve in this, or if that's something maybe for council to consider, but I share her concern.
So I'm going to add one more thing. I just thought of another example, and it's actually something for me, just educate me. So at one time, I was interested in buying the back half of my neighbor's property, and then joining our properties. I'm in R2, but the lots are not wide enough. Sorry, hold on. No one ever calls me. Okay. The lots are not wide enough to have multifamily duplex. However, by my neighbor subdividing his land, and then by me taking that land, I can't think of the term, my lot would then be wide enough to put a multifamily home on it. Yeah, based on the width. So the subdivision itself would not raise any flags by anybody, but when I went to merge the 2 properties, that may raise flags, correct? So would you look at the intent on why the subdivision while the administrative review? Would you look at the intent in the not that I want to go multifamily, but by the fact that I am now joining those 2 properties, my property is now wide enough for multifamily, which does affect the neighborhood because there's no other multifamily in that neighborhood.
I mean, that's certainly something that we look at, but again, the comparison is that there are probably many lots out there that are eligible for multifamily that aren't developed that way, and if they came in for building permit, there's no notification requirement.
Fair enough. Okay. So, Amanda? I'm taking one more. We still have questions for her. Do you have any questions? Okay. Do we have any more questions of staff? Okay. So if no more questions of staff, then I'm willing to hear a motion. Got to have a motion one way or the other.
I'll make a motion. Did you say page 6?
Page 6, bottom.
Oh. Looking at page 6 of the exhibit, sorry. It's not there. All right. I move to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending Chapter 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the subdivision regulations and making certain related amendments to Chapters 2 and 5 in association therewith.
Second?
Comments, discussion? Amanda?
I just would like to sort of weigh in on the conversation. While I do agree that there should be public input, I think by merit of the fact that we have gone through the zoning, and the zoning does allow, right, I guess I see your argument as valid in that if people are coming in and we're saying they can have public comment on something, but there's absolutely nothing they can do about it, is there merit in saying, yeah, you can come in and say something, but we've already zoned this R2, or we've already zoned this R3. And if they meet our building, right, these are all the things that we've been working on to create consistent standards, and if they meet their standards, we're sort of disencouraging what we said is okay in that zoning area. And so I guess that's what I'd like to say, is that it just seems like an oxymoron to say, we're gonna allow public comment, but in the end, we're gonna say, well, I'm sorry. We've already decided what these design standards are, we've already decided what these zonings are, and people can do what they want to do within that, right? And they go into the permit process. And all right, I'll be quiet now.
Scott or Silke? Scott, yeah.
I agree with Amanda, which is why I felt comfortable putting the motion forward. I mean, it's if the zoning in a particular area is a cause for concern among those who live there or among the planners or anyone else, that I think is a discussion that merits its own space. But I do see some concerns that might come about by somebody with a large lot that's perfectly within their right to develop within the certain, the zoning that exists. I can see some surprises maybe, coming out of this. So, there is that there, but I agree with you that it's maybe a different type of discussion that sits outside of the subdivision discussion.
Any other comments? So we have a first, we have a second. Let's vote, please.
Motion approved, 6-0.
Thank you. And that closes the public hearing. Do we have any other items for the evening?
We do not have any other items. We will have a meeting next month, or later this month, April 17th. So we do have one case scheduled for that evening.
Scott, I will not be here. I will not be here. I can be called in if you need a quorum, but barring that, I can't be here. Okay. Okay. So if we have nothing else, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
May I have a second?
Second.
Vote, please.
Motion approved, 6-0.
Thank you all. Have a good night.